something that they clearly don't want to do, but it's my duty to obey. And every time I hear someone say that, and it's been said recently to me, I sort of shudder. I can't help but wonder, is it? And for me, in marriage, both, and this should be true of every relationship we're in actually, not just marriage, even friendship, we should always want the best for the person that we care about. We should always want them to fulfill their greatest possible potential and flourish to be the person that God created them to be. And the idea that kind of in some relationships, somehow some are subjugated to another, which seems to me is implied in this principle, I feel is kind of is incompatible with that. I think one of the interesting things we have found in 40 years is you change. We are still the people that married each other, and I would go back and do it again today. If and I would live it all. Well, perhaps not all of it. I'd live most of it again. I am going off my notes, aren't I? Yeah, sorry, you warned me. You did warn me. But one of the things that I've loved is how Carole has grown as a person. How different things she encountered, different ideas she had, has meant that actually she now thinks and has totally different views to the lady that I married. And I love the way that she's grown as a person. And I think if we're in a relationship, we want the people we care about to fulfill their potential. Okay, we've got a problem. Is this biblical? Unlike the marriage vows, the word the Bible uses is submit, not obey. Okay, does that get us off the hook? I always used to think that was I don't know about you, when you think about words, I always used to think that submit is a slightly milder form than obey. I don't know what you feel about that. That was always been in my mind. The word, though, that's used for submit, the Greek word is, I can't really pronounce it, is hypotassa. It's actually a military word, and actually it's a surprisingly strong word. It means to rank under. So kind of, although we translate it as to submit to, it's more kind of along the lines of to be subject to. It's actually quite a strong word, as is obey, really. So I'm not sure that actually the word makes a difference. And it just kind of begs the question where love comes into it, really. Submit, be subject, to obey, love. So at first sight, the word, rather than being weaker, is actually very strong. It has all sorts of connotations with authority. It's used 21 times in the New Testament, and it's used in a variety of situations, not just husbands and wives. It's used talking about slaves being subject to their masters, about every citizen being subject to the ruling authorities, about parents obeying their children. About children obeying their parents. It does often work the other way around as well. So it has a lot of strength, and it would have been part of the cultural norm of the world in which Paul was kind of speaking. So being subject to was a big deal in the Roman world. You really were subject to Caesar. To not be subject to Caesar might cost you your life. But Jesus says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, when people try and put them in a box about paying tax and how you respond to authority. For the Christianity of Paul's day to say don't submit or don't be subject to would have been unthinkable. Christianity was radical, but actually for Christianity to say don't submit would almost kind of deny it of a hearing in the world in which Paul lives. Paul also says that slaves should be subject to their masters. And no one is suggesting for a moment that slavery is right. And it's one of the shames of Christianity that it took us too long to realize that that was never what God wanted. And I think we need to hold that in mind when we look at this whole idea of being subject to. The next thing is the context. You have to look to find a translation that doesn't have a paragraph break between verse 21 and verse 22. So most translations begin the section with husbands and wives and neatly separate what it says about husbands and wives for what's gone in the previous verse, which is verse 21. And in verse 21, it says, submit yourselves to one another out of reverence to Christ. And for me, that shapes the whole passage completely differently. To start with, the first thing is to say that actually in relationships, being subject to one another, actually listening to and allowing people to speak into our lives applies to every relationship we are in as Christians. It's something for all Christians in all relationships and in all circumstances. But actually, when we then listen to wives be subject to your husbands, husbands love your wives, we have to do it in the context of that first verse. Submit yourselves to one another. We can't take that out of the picture. And then take the next thing. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. It's really interesting, isn't it, that kind of the Church of England, it's changed now, but in our day, was really anxious to have in the bit that wives should obey their husbands, but it never thought about removing the bit where it said that wives had to love their husbands. It doesn't say anywhere that wives should love their husbands. It does say that they should obey them. It says husbands should love their wives. It's interesting. Why do we want to police the be subject to bit, but we don't police the love? No one would say, because the husband's duty is to love the wife doesn't have to love her husband. That would make no sense at all, would it? Kind of, why would we be marrying someone if we didn't actually want to love them? But somehow we remove the obligation the other way. It becomes one-sided. And this is where I am coming into land, and I'm going to let my wife get a word in edgeways. And this is actually where Christianity is radical. The Greco-Roman world, even the Hebrew culture of Paul's day, would never place any obligation on a husband. That would have been unthinkable. All of the obligations would have been placed on the woman in that relationship. Christianity is radical in calling husbands to account and in demanding love for their wives as an obligation. But the context of all of this is, it seems to me, in a setting of mutual submission, not a power play between one person over another. So what's the secret of a long marriage? Doing what I'm told? Probably not. It seems to me the secret of a long marriage is not obedience or subjugation, but compromise, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. For men being big enough to give their wives a voice and allow them to fulfill their potential as well as wanting to fulfill their own. And too often this passage becomes permissive in one party overriding another. And because I've got to do what I'm told, I'm going to stop and let Carole pick up the thread from there. Do you want my Bible?
So my part of the story now. So, as Chris says, yes, we have been married for 40 years. And I did say obey at our wedding because, as Chris said, at the time, there was a lot of conversation going on about, should you say obey or not? And we were in a big youth group and a lot of people were getting married and we were all having that conversation, and some chose to and some didn't. But we probably did feel pressurised a bit. And I think, obviously, since then, the church has moved on and explored and realised that perhaps saying obey isn't necessarily the right word to use within a marriage service. But anyway, I came to terms with it myself because I thought that if ever there was a time when we couldn't agree on something, someone had to take and make that final decision. And so, in a way, it seemed, Chris could do that. He was a man, he could take that final decision. However, since that time, I think we'd all have changed our views and think that that idea also has been updated. So what do I believe submission or submitting should look like? Well, I think it's about listening. It's about understanding, it's about compromise, and it's about coming to a joint decision, not about one person making that decision for the family or for their partner. It can mean not doing what you want, but allowing the other person to have their wish because of your love for them, not because of out of obedience or having to. However, I think we do need to be careful because under the auspices of a good Christian marriage, men can use this passage as an excuse to override the woman in everything or in some areas, because the Bible says submit. It can be interpreted as enabling the man or a man to have the power and control over a woman, which can lead women to feel or be or become powerless and can then lead on to domestic abuse. On a different tack, this passage can also lead women to abdicate all responsibility for making any decisions, particularly the difficult ones. And they can leave their husbands to make all the decisions, and then when it's all wrong, they can blame them because it's nothing to do with me. Neither way is right, because all decisions should be jointly owned. And sometimes there is no right or wrong decision, and you have to take equal responsibility. So where do we go from here? Where do we go for help? How can we explore this whole thing further? With regards to marriage, I would say there are some good marriage books out there. There's some very good marriage courses. The marriage course done by HTB is great. I would talk to people who you trust and who you feel understand you and where you're at so that you can talk through any issues. And there is always Relate and other marriage counselling services. As regard to domestic abuse, if this is something that you have been affected by or you are being affected by, if you're experiencing control, coercion or violence, a different type of help is needed. Please do seek help. And if we've got a slide that could just go up, we'll stay up afterwards. But there are some local excellent services for people who are suffering domestic abuse. The DAVs, Look Ahead, and there's also a Christian company, a charity called Restored, who support Christians in domestic abusive and violent relationships. Sadly, the church has been and can be a haven for domestic abuse, and women can fear sharing what they think because they think they won't be believed, or that they would be told they just have to put up with it. That's what a woman has to do. This is not the case, certainly not here. And we would want to support anyone who is experiencing this or who has experienced this. I'd also want to emphasise that it's not just about men abusing women. It can be, of course, the other way around, and it can also be in different types of relationships, not just in marriage, as Chris has already said. So I want to end with a video. It is 6 minutes long. I do apologise for the length of the whole of this service, actually. It has been produced by Restored, which is this Christian charity which supports people who are going through domestic abuse. And it's designed with churches in mind. It gives us an understanding of what domestic abuse is about. It gives us insights and the relevance of what it's about. Now, this may not be a situation that you are experiencing or have any idea of anyone that is experiencing it. However, We probably all do know someone who has experienced this or is experiencing this if the statistics, which is in the video, are correct. The video may be painful for some who have gone through this or are going through this. But our aim, or my aim of this morning, is really to get domestic abuse out in the open, so that it's something that we can talk about safely and not be hidden away. So please don't just switch off if you think it's nothing to do with you, because actually it does affect all of us. You never know if it might affect you or if you might come across someone that it is affecting, and you can then support them. So we're just going to watch the video.
It's only really domestic abuse if there's physical violence.
Domestic abuse is actually about one person in a relationship trying to control and have power over the other. This might or might not include physical violence, along with devaluing the other person, isolating them, using sex to degrade them, exhausting them, using any children to further their abuse, and controlling the finances.
Domestic abuse happens to those women, from lower socioeconomic groups. Women from other countries, it doesn't happen to women I know. We're not like those women.
The only common denominator for domestic abuse is an abuser, and they are from all walks of life. Thinking abuse happens to those women makes us feel safer and blames those who do experience abuse. We need to recognise abuse happens to us women and remove the barriers of false separation between those who do experience abuse and those who do not.
There are a lot of people who falsely report domestic abuse or rape, so any allegations should probably be taken with a pinch of salt.
The statistics for false reports of rape or domestic abuse to police are no higher and may even be lower than for other crimes. If someone shares with you that they have been abused, the most important thing to do is to believe them.
Domestic abuse is a relationship issue, and relationship counselling should be the first port of call for couples.
Domestic abuse is not a relationship issue. It is the issue of an abusive person. Relationship counselling assumes both parties have equal power, which is not the case where there is abuse.
Domestic abuse happens because of things like debt, drug, alcohol issues, unemployment, stress, maybe childhood trauma, mental illness.
Although all of these issues can be related to domestic abuse, they are not the cause. These issues exist in the lives of people who don't abuse, as well as those who do. Primarily, domestic abuse happens because someone chooses to behave in a way that is abusive and is motivated by beliefs of owning their partner and the entitlement of doing what they want. It is these beliefs that need to be addressed if an abuser wants to change their behaviour.
Domestic abuse happens at almost equal levels to men as it does to women.
The majority of men who experience domestic abuse are in gay relationships or are adult children of a woman being abused by a partner. Where men are experiencing abuse, research has found that when men leave a relationship, they are not at the same level of risk from an abusive female partner as women are from a male abuser. Men need good support and help, but to end abuse, we must acknowledge that domestic abuse disproportionately affects women.
If it was that bad, someone who is being abused would just leave.
If someone is being abused, their choices should not be the focus. Instead of asking, why doesn't she just leave? We should be asking, why doesn't he stop? An abuser will ensure their victim thinks they cannot cope alone. It can appear financially impossible to leave the situation, and a woman is most at risk of being murdered when she is trying to leave an abuser. Leaving can be very dangerous and should be done wherever possible with support from trained professionals.
Abusive men aren't bad fathers and wherever possible should have access to their children.
By being abusive to the mother of the children, he is being a bad father. A good father respects and values the mother of the children, whether they are his biological children or not. Evidence shows it is not in the best interests of children to have access to fathers who have been abusive without the intervention of a perpetrator program. Witnessing domestic abuse is a recognised form of child abuse and must be treated as such.
Domestic abuse is about anger and people who get abused wind their partners up.
Although abusers may appear angry, they are totally in control of their actions. This is why they will only smash their partner's things and why they usually manage not to use abuse in public places. Nobody but the abuser is responsible for their abusive behaviour.
If an abuser says he is sorry and appears to be repentant, his partner should be reconciled to him and accept he has repented.
Although it is possible for abusers to change and be transformed through God's power, very often an abuser will appear repentant or appear to become a Christian in order to gain space for his abuse to continue. If he appears to come to faith in Christ and or appears repentant or remorseful, this cannot be taken at face value. Regardless of whether change has taken place, the woman has still been impacted horrifically by the abuse she has suffered, and she has the right to choose not to reconcile. If the perpetrator has repented, he will understand this and support her in her decisions.
Domestic abuse is a private matter. It's not for us to get involved.
Domestic abuse is both a public safety issue and a human rights issue. It is a crime, and in the UK, at least 25% of women will be abused by a partner or ex at some point in their lifetime, and over 750,000 children a year witness domestic abuse. This is about social justice and requires all of us to do our part to see those who are suffering empowered, abusers held accountable, and communities working to bring about equality.
It may seem a bit strange. No, we've gone from love, marriage to domestic abuse. It's been very wide range of things to talk about, and you may think, "Gosh, what a wide range!" And was it appropriate? But it did just feel that this was an opportunity to talk about this very sensitive issue, as well as obviously to look at the passage because we're going through Ephesians. And I think the video challenges us on some of the questions and things that we've perhaps thought about and answers that we've had. Maybe that the answers on there may have been different to the ones that you might have thought about. If, again, we said, if this is something that you would like to talk through or you'd like to have prayer for, Katie is willing at the front to pray with you, and that really fits in with what Katie was sharing during the worship about maybe you're going through a really difficult time, you don't feel God is great because things aren't great at the moment, then Katie will be here to pray, and Chris and I will be outside. You can always talk to us and we can always meet up with you afterwards. And Julia Church, who's our safeguarding officer, will be having to rush away now, but her details are around on the board. You can always contact her as well. So I hope that's it's been quite a heavy morning talk in a way, but I hope it's just, as we said, put things out in the open, and we want to be a place where we can all be in relationships that are safe and where we can talk through issues that affect us. So Jane, would you like to come?